Okay.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, we can go get started now. Good morning. How are we doing? Welcome back. Well, I think we have everything firing on all the cylinders we need to be firing right now. So I'll go ahead and kick us off. I'm going to talk to you for about 18, 20 minutes. And I'm going to read a little bit from a transcript. That's to kind of keep me in pace. I also, just as a disclaimer, I don't know how many of you haven't presented in person for a while. And it's a new fun reminder of how nerve-wracking that can be. The safety of being behind a Zoom screen is quite nice sometimes, and like in bed or whatever, four walls make you feel comfortable. And so I shall do my best. All right. So my name's Allison Moore, and I teach upper division writing in the disciplines and writing in the professions at the University of California at Davis. That's my email up there. Should you want to talk to me for any reason, share resources, give me some feedback, ask me questions about things. I'm super collaborative, happy to share things overall, should you have any questions. I didn't get here alone, and so I'm always really open to those types of things. Also, if you're remote or if you're here, in the chat function on the Whova app right before the session, I just added a link to my Google Slides and the transcript that I'm reading from right now. Should you want to follow along that way. I have a couple hyperlinks later in the presentation that link to some website designs that my students did. And so if you want those things in front of you as well. And I know there's just been access issues and stuff in a hybrid type conference, right? Oh, yeah. And the title of my presentation is called DEI and Languaging Across the Curriculum. So I'm here to talk to you today about the dissertation project I completed at the University of Nevada, Reno, right? Oh, that's an echo. Okay. Sorry. In this study, I wanted to know more about the kinds of diverse, equitable, and inclusive, or DEI practices already happening in writing courses. I wanted to know basically, how well are we doing with implementing students' right to their own language, right? We've done a lot of work with that throughout our history, writing studies, writing composition, rhetoric and composition, writing across the curriculum, and so on. I wanted to know, how are we doing with making DEI foundational to writing pedagogy across the curriculum? So I wanted to also look elsewhere, outside of my discipline, for answers. I wanted to know what DEI experts in particular were doing in their classrooms. How were they engaging DEI practices? What did those things look like? Fortunately, the University of Nevada, Reno has an interdisciplinary program called Gender, Race, and Identity that houses all kinds of DEI courses, from introduction to intersectionality to gender studies, sociology, history, anthropology, psychology, all of the ologies you can think of that haven't even been created yet are housed within this interdisciplinary program with folks from all across campus. In addition, I also wanted to get an idea for how writing teachers outside of my university, those invested in DEI and social justice, were doing the things that they were doing in their courses. So I created 3 case studies. They're right here. One in first year writing in my program at Nevada, one in the Gender, Race, and Identity program at Nevada, and one across the country, all of which collected course materials, conducted classroom observations, and instructor interviews. All instructors and courses were identified as investing in DEI and social justice. And I just want to just pause on that for a second to suggest that that's not something that everybody identifies as. And DEI are synonymous. They work with each other, right? So like, we've all taken some type of teacher training to get here, perhaps, whether it was a week in the summer in between your BA and grad school, and you got thrown into the ringer rather quickly, or if you took a lengthier pedagogical course design, those types of things. And so, and a lot of times in those moments, DEI on this, or a week on this, or a unit on this, not something that's foundational to how we do this type of pedagogy. And so still working as an additive. And yeah, I understand the constraints of teaching folks about how to be writing teachers in a week, right? Or in a quarter or in a semester, but there are ways that we can design our courses with DEI foundationally that also shows students how they can grade. And this is where I think DEI and WAC work hand in hand. So I essentially am invested in how DEI practices are kin to literacy and composition equity. So once I went through the fun process of organizing, coding data, which part of me still has PTSD from and never want to do again. I'm like a year fresh out of this. And during COVID, a lot of wrenches in the system. And so once I put all that data together and found cool things out, I essentially found 4 main data trends. The first is that instructors, both writing and elsewhere, invested in DEI and social justice, developed their courses explicitly around those things. Their courses are about social justice or intersectionality explicitly and unapologetically. They, like scholars like Gloria Anzaldúa and others, know that language and identity are inextricably tied. Second, instructors, both writing and elsewhere, invested in DEI and social justice tend to extend the diversity language and policies of the university in their syllabus and their classroom practices, and so on, because that language is often blanketed and vague, just covering the bases, right? Here's the Title IX office, here's my language, here's my ADA statement, disability studies, whatever it might be, things that we have to include, or we're told that we have to include. So these courses have inclusive language statements, land acknowledgements, classroom community standards, logos and images from like LGBTQIA+ and undocumented student centers on campus. Third, instructors agree that diversity work, as Sarah Ahmed tells us, is embodied practice. We learn through doing. Right? And lastly, instructors engage diverse composing practices in their courses. Students interact with a variety of media and compose in various genres and through multiple modes, which makes me think about Dr. Yancey's talk from yesterday, the keynote in particular, that we learn to write and we write to learn. So now I don't think that these things are new to us. Like, I'm not trying to stand up here as like revolutionary, like we haven't thought of these practices before, especially when it comes to writing across the curriculum. Genre and multimodality is not something that's new to us, right? But I do think they serve as a reminder that multi-pronged, intersectional, and equitable approaches to teaching writing are the kind of practices that help us write across the curriculum. 4 for 4, okay. So this is why just a little bit of theoretical framing for me, and I'll go through this rather quickly because I want to spend some time talking about the course that I've designed as well. But this is why I grab onto Ellen Cushman's notion of languaging and how Asal Inouye extends her work into his anti-racist assessment ecologies and course designs. So in particular, I was looking at Cushman's article from 2016 in College English that talks about translingualism and decoloniality and this notion of languaging. And for Asal, I think most of his stuff talks about this idea, this concept that language is something that we are doing and active and something that happens across multiple disciplines. So both scholars highlight that languaging emphasizes doing. In antithesis to the static, the standard, standardization, Cushman asks us, can we as a discipline see a National Council of Teachers of Languaging? Can we truly see past leading with exclusionary standard English-based notions of ways of making meaning in the world? She says, of course we can. So according to them, languaging in its basic verb form suggests that it is moving, that it is active, and that we do language, as Toni Morrison tells us in her 1993 Nobel Prize speech. If you haven't looked at that, like me, sometimes play it as you go to bed at night, go ahead and do that. Add it to your Calm app, whatever it might be, right? But languaging stands in contrast from the notion of standardization in the sense that to be standard is to be stagnant, set in stone, happening only in writing courses, happening only in English departments, and those kinds of things. Languaging illustrates not only the interdisciplinarity of composing, but the intersectionality of it. When we're languaging, we're considering the histories, discourses, and experiences that go into how we think and practice language, rather than just language in its mechanical grammatical forms. When we're languaging, we're moving, we're following language around, we're seeing how it circulates, how it adapts. We're asking ourselves and our students to not just engage with text, but also the people, the places, the materials, the environments that influence those texts, how those texts are composed and how they circulate. And to again, throw back to Dr. Yancey's keynote from yesterday, 2 questions that I'm thinking about when it comes to DEI, social justice, and writing across the curriculum in terms of course design are, what is writing and what does it mean to write? So the second half of my presentation is kind of like what I've done with this stuff, right? Disclaimer, this is the first time I've done something with this stuff in terms of course design and in class. But at the University of California, Davis, we have a pretty extensive writing in the disciplines and writing in the professions program. So you have either of those tracks will help students get through an upper division writing requirement and so on. One of the particular courses that I get to teach, because this is my wheelhouse, is called Writing for Social Justice. So yeah, the course is part of the professional development or the professional writing series, but essentially I've made it writing in the professions and writing in the disciplines so that most students can have some kind of in to the content. The course is open to all undergraduate students and is just one option for them to fulfill their upper division writing requirement. So I have STEM students, humanities students, social science students, business finance people. Of course, I have students that are super dialed in to issues of social justice. I had a couple English majors this past spring, and I had a handful of, we have a writing minor, we don't have a writing major. So a really good mix of students in this class overall. So this course focuses on composing as an act of social justice and emphasizes access, accessibility, genre, multimodality in order to do equitable languaging practices across the curriculum. It asks framing questions like, what does it mean to do social justice work in my field of study or my profession? How do diverse composing practices help us achieve equitable access to knowledge and information? And what texts and approaches are most accessible and usable to people in the communities I'm trying to reach? Once again, Dr. Yancey's keynote from yesterday, her points have stuck out with me, if that's not apparent, when I was writing down things and trying to eat my parfait or whatever it was. But I was like, oh, these things tie in really well to the things that I've been thinking about. So I'm throwing it back to her talk a lot. But her points stick with me as I'm approaching revising this course after teaching it for the first time this past spring, which for me ended on Monday of this week. All right, so if this isn't all together and something, my brain doesn't fire on all cylinders, you'll know why. All right. But she mentioned two things that I think are crucial for writing across the curriculum in DEI and social justice. First, that what is happening in the space is the text, right? This makes me think of the age-old relationship between like content and form, right? Whatever is needed in that moment to communicate the information effectively, that's what we teach students how to do. That becomes the text. And then also you write to learn and you learn to write. I think one of my favorite phrases, I'm gonna get tattooed on my arm after this, because it just suggests that kind of duality of a relationship, that there's push and pull between both of those things, that in how we construct knowledge and how it circulates across different spaces. So in a course that emphasizes diverse composing practices, students are able to research and achieve answers to these questions through multiple routes, considering the needs of their audiences, disciplinary or professional genre conventions and expectations, and usability and access and accessibility. So access in terms of, and I think a lot of my students really focused on this because I hadn't thought about writing in this way, but who has actually access to the information? Who has the internet, right? Do they need to be physical print copies of things? Does a website work? Does social media work for them? Those kinds of things. And then of course, accessibility in terms of like, does my PDF, can it be read by a screen reader? Right. So those two things, the difference between those terms was really, I think, eye-opening for students and got them to think about language and writing in a variety of different ways that maybe they hadn't before. Okay. So like I said, in the chat, you have links to my slides and then what I'm reading through to y'all right now. But there's also a link to my actual syllabus that has all my course policies, a calendar, and all that kind of stuff in it. And then later on, there's a link to my sequence and those types of things as well. So I've designed this course with a few things in mind. First, inclusive syllabus, language and course policies that are flexible. Second, projects that have students researching how to be effective composers in certain places and spaces and for certain communities. It is a class focused on social justice, so there are folks in that room keen to activism. But I would argue that like writing and composing and doing diverse composing practices is that kind of social justice work, right? Literacy equity is huge, a huge gatekeeper of knowledge and information. Right? And third, with advocacy and learning to make information accessible and usable for diverse audiences, most of the instructors from my study include things like land acknowledgement, inclusive language statements or quotes from students write to their own language, which is what I do. I'm like, hey, here's the thing we're working with. Tell me how well we're doing, right? How does it play out in the actual classroom? Extended classroom community expectations that talk about implicit bias and microaggressions and so on. The instructors also include flexible and adaptable policies and course processes that build space for diverse student learning. For instance, I often have students with accommodations, as I'm sure many of you do, right? That might require extra time on a reading response, and in class you only have an hour and 20 minutes, so the reading response can only be 15 or 20 minutes long, right? So instead of just having it for something that students with accommodations to do, I do it for all students. As long as they start their response in class, they can go back up to it until the start of the next class session. Lots of folks also use some version of a grading contract. Folks in the room? Grading contracts, a little bit, right? Modified versions. When I first read this out, in a way, is really intense one at the back of writing assessment ecology, is I was like, oh, wow, that was a lot of labor involved in that, right? And so there's some expected pushback in those in that arena as well. Mine's a little bit of a modified version of that. Mine awards a complete or incomplete grade. I give lots of written or verbal feedback, depending what students prefer. Some students really like verbal feedback and audio recording, talking to me in person. Some students also just like written feedback because that's how their brains work, right? I give them that feedback, I give them a revision date, and then students can revise and resubmit for a complete. No letters, no points. Yes, I have to award a letter grade at the end because I'm beholden to the university, right? But my face can tell you how I feel about that. But I want to reward the learning that happens in between, because the rhetorical awareness, the genre awareness, the researching the needs of their audiences, those are the skills that transfer across the curriculum and show us how to make equitable and accessible composing choices. The final letter grade is determined by the number of incomplete assignments they have and the number of unexcused absences. Real hard to have an unexcused absence unless I just don't hear from you. If you keep me in the loop, I'm really flexible with those types of things. My goal is that people get completes on their assignments and they get A's in the courses, right? But there are a lot of different ways to get there. And especially because those students are coming into that room with a variety of different linguistic experiences, college experiences, work experiences, whatever it might be. Some are transfer students, some haven't even taken a writing course in college. And so that type of approach really helps them achieve the learning outcomes in a variety of different ways that I'm kind of attuned to as we move through. And again, I'm on quarters, so we got like 10 weeks to do this stuff, which is not a lot of time. So for example, you can have one unexcused absence and one minor incomplete assignment, and you can earn an A for the course, right? So a couple little incompletes there. I forgot I was holding this, okay. This is a, I know, a horrifically designed slide, but I didn't want to click back and forth between like my syllabus and the presentation, and like I wanted to be nice to myself for technological reasons. But this is just a sampling of course materials that students engage with in terms of like content. What are they reading? What are they doing? So instructors from my study explicitly make their courses about social justice, whether it's intersectionality, racial justice, linguistic justice, or the like. Of course, the content experts in gender, race, and identity are teaching these kinds of courses, but the emphasis on writing courses that teach students across the curriculum about social justice is there is a constant focus on equitable access to the text. We're reading and composing wherever we are, wherever we might be. So in our first unit, we start with bell hooks, mostly because she's my girl and I want her in everything that I do, right? And her emphasis on education as the practice of freedom. The first unit spends time setting the framework for the course. Many students come in with different writing experiences and so on. So we spend time talking about the term social justice, how they've seen it, how they've interacted with it, and how thinking about equitable and accessible composing impacts all fields, all professions, and communities. We do this through discussions of literacy equity and genre analysis and multimodality, but mostly students research the rhetorical and structural features of documents and practice that composing. They are doing the languaging, right? They are looking at what is happening in the spaces that they occupy and where they are expected to do the language, and they figure out the best text to create, what those have rhetorically, what those have structurally, and so on. Keep forgetting that I have the clicker. And just a real quick breakdown of what this sequence looks like. Again, I've linked it in the title to this slide overall. So you can dig into it, ask me questions outside of here and so on. But instructors from my study also incorporated a variety of different assignments, all mostly focusing on identity, language, literacy, access, and equity in a number of ways. So the project sequence tries to reflect that kind of pedagogy. Students do genre research and analysis and create a how-to compose guide for future folks in their field and or professions. They create a multimodal how-to guide, right? So they have some experience with that right off the bat. They develop a quarter-long proposal that responds to a specific call or request for proposals, an academic like research. It can be research, it can be a project, it can be something community focused, and so on. And then they take that mostly written document and they transform it into what I call a multimodal advocacy campaign, where they introduce their issue and the solutions that they've put in their proposal. And they create at least 2 multimodal documents for the campaign and present their argument for why their campaign is successful based on how they consider their intended audiences when making those composing choices. Lastly, they reflect on the framing questions of the course using their own work as support, and they think about what diverse, inclusive, and equitable composing looks like across and beyond the university. A couple examples, all right? So we just went through this. This is like, it was hard for me. I really wanted to share a lot of student work, but like they just submitted these on like Monday. So the turnaround for that and grading has been a little difficult for me. But I did want to show just a couple of examples of 2 multimodal advocacy campaigns where they designed a website, which is a really useful multimodal document. And I also want to say too that the end goal with these advocacy campaigns and these multimodal documents is not for them to become like website design masters, right? They're already more tech savvy than I ever could imagine. I remember living in a world without technology, and so they just have it in their DNA more so than I do, right? So I thought I would show 2 websites, because they were easy to access, and they were also really kind of well done, I think. So one focusing on the right to migrate. Oh, can I not click on that? No. I thought I would just be able to do that. Yeah. Okay. If not, they'll live in your brain, imagining. We have the same problem with ours too, where it's actually. Oh, okay. Okay, it might be up at the top. Thank you. Perfect, there it is. Don't go too far. Okay. Right. Okay. So I just chose a couple websites as examples, but they also have, each of these ones that I'm showing you also have like an accompanying flyer, brochure, something that's happening out in the real world. A lot of students identified that a type of advocacy campaign lives online and in person for the types of communities that they're trying to reach, right? In particular, this student is focusing on being able to migrate as a human right. So they've come up with a website that's called Embracing Migrant Rights, Uniting for Change, right? It's a coalition dedicated to serving various under-resourced and underserved migrant communities. They've designed a website that I think works pretty effectively if we think about who this is going to interact with and in terms of document design as well. They know that their key target audience is not going to speak English, most likely, right? So there's there's translation throughout. You know, they've done the basic things of clicking to different sections through tabs and so on, right? But this is how they've displayed the written research and work that they wrote in their proposals, right? And now they're trying to get other folks that aren't going to read a 30-page proposal or whatever it might be on their side, or they're trying to get resources to the communities that are being impacted as well. And then the second one, oh, do I have to do it again? I see, it pulled it up a million times and then I got it. Thank you. Okay. And then the second one is advocating for reproductive justice in a variety of different ways. And I'll skim through it a little bit because it does have some sensitive content on it, right? But what they fight for, they're dedicated to providing equitable and accessible, compassionate care. So I thought these two, this website in particular, really again goes back to that relationship between form and content and how DEI work and writing across the curriculum are going hand in hand, right? Their content is how do we make information more accessible to these communities who would benefit for them? That is social justice work, right? But this is also WAC, right? This is writing across the curriculum in a very basic sense, right? So these are two that just kind of stood out for me that I wanted to share. I'll get back to this. All right, almost like I got it now, y'all. And then, so in closing, I'd like us to think about how languaging is social justice work. Since we know that language and identity are inextricably tied, like Ansel Dua, Inoue, insert a bunch of other people that I don't have time to name, have talked about throughout our history, right? Since we know that language and identity are inextricably tied, it makes sense that DEI and social justice would lead the way with writing across the curriculum in order to make composing and language practices more accessible and equitable through these kinds of courses. Emphasizing languaging across the curriculum as social justice work, as the data trends reveal from my study, shows how multi-pronged and DEI-focused approaches for languaging across the curriculum work effectively to address the gaps between what we say we do when it comes to diversity work and what we actually do, creating meaningful and tangible practices that can be repurposed, revised, and applied to the writing courses we're teaching and to engage the linguistic diversity of the students in front of us. Thank you. All the fun part.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think after that,
You're
there
just
was
gonna
that
share your screen?
Q&A. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. I think you can, Dr. Tucker, you can share your screen right now.
Okay, sure. Give me just a moment. All right, that seems to be
Whatever
working.
body of water you're at. All right, Kelly, we're ready for you whenever you are.
If somebody was just speaking to me, I couldn't hear you. I apologize, but just let me know when you're ready for me to get going.
You can go.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
I forgot the microphone, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. Well, hi, everybody. It's great to see you. My name is Kaylee Tucker. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you all for being here today. I know I'm coming at you remotely. If I am difficult to hear, I do have some access slides here, a link to those here on the screen. I'm going to leave this up for just a moment as I'm kind of outlining what it is that I'm going to be talking about today. But I'm working off of a script. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is coming from the first chapter of my dissertation, the research for which I will be starting this fall, having to do with racial-linguistic ideologies in writing instructor development. But today I'm going to be sharing with you all what this framework is, racial-linguistic ideologies. It's a framework from educational linguistics that I believe has a potential to help us understand how to connect racial and linguistic injustice in writing across the curriculum. Because in recent years, while we have seen an influx of work related to racial justice in WAC through scholars like Inoue and Poe, and work on linguistic justice in WAC through scholars like Matsuda, Cox, and Zawacki, we've paid a little bit less attention, I think, to the mutually constitutive relationship between these two goals. And so today I'm going to be talking about why it is so critical that we understand the social and ideological constructions of race and language as interconnected phenomena. I'm going to describe how the racial-linguistic theoretical lens offers us a way to understand the harm that instructors teaching writing may unintentionally be enacting on our students through linguistic racism, as well as talk about how this framework can help us envision a more inclusive future for both writing across the curriculum and higher education more broadly. So the term racial-linguistic ideologies refers to the entanglement of ideological constructions of language and race, and it conceptualizes the way that attitudes about language and about language users are shaped by racial stereotypes and racism. So the framework of racial-linguistic ideologies is derived from the racial-linguistic theoretical perspective proposed by Nelson Flores and Jonathan Rosa in 2015. So here on the slide, I've got a list of some of the 5 components of a ratiolinguistic theoretical perspective that they outlined in a later work. They published a lot of material on this framework. So if it's something that you're interested in, Rosa and Flores are the people you'll want to look for. So the ratiolinguistic theoretical perspective attends to the historical and contemporary colonial connaturalizations of race and language, the perceptions of a race and linguistic difference, regimentations of racial and linguistic categories, racial and linguistic intersections and assemblages, and contestations of racial and linguistic power formations. And so what this perspective does is it offers a way of analyzing race and language together rather than as discrete and disconnected social processes in order to uncover the ways in which race and language function as proxies for one another. So this framework helps to make visible the ways in which the linguistic production of racialized multilingual people is perceived through the white gaze, which Rosa and Flores refer to as the white listening subject. So the white listening subject is an ideological position. Garcia et al. Describe it as not always just listening, nor is it only white. Instead, it refers to those who inhabit positions of institutionalized power that are produced and maintained on the one hand through structures of white supremacy, and on the other hand through modes of perceiving and apprehending language, including but not limited to listening. So in essence, what ratiolinguistic ideologies describes is they are responsible for how the language use of linguistically and racially minoritized people, when perceived from that ideological position of the white linguistic subject, it describes how they're ideologically constructed as inferior and inappropriate in formal settings like academic and professional writing. So as a result of the influence of ratiolinguistic ideologies, they've played a role in the development of deficit discourses in US educational spaces, including K-12, as well as higher education. And so as a result, this theoretical perspective is important to the work of teaching writing and administrating writing programs like WAC initiatives, because it offers us a framework for uncovering the linguistic racism inherent in the teaching of writing through deficit discourses. So linguistic racism occurs as the result of ratiolinguistic ideologies that, according to Flores and Rosa, conflate certain racialized bodies with linguistic deficiency unrelated to any objective linguistic practices, even when engaging in linguistic practices positioned as normative or innovative when produced by privileged white subjects. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'm defining linguistic racism as racism based on one's linguistic practices, resulting from ratiolinguistic ideologies that frame racialized multilingual writers' linguistic practices as deficient. So as a result of linguistic racism, racialized multilingual students frequently have to confront very powerful myths and norms surrounding language use and writing. These can occur in the form of stereotypes, racial scripts and categories, labeling, and other types of deficit discourses and narratives of inferiority that constrain learning and work to disenfranchise these students. So linguistic racism highlights the fact that the consequences of language use are starkly different for different students according to their linguistic and racial identities. Writers whose ways of languaging already adhere closely to standardized English experience clear linguistic privileges, while writers whose ways of languaging do not will often experience devastating consequences. In the classroom, linguistic racism can result in racialized multilingual students feeling fearful, inadequate, and ultimately silenced as a result of their limited possibilities for engagement, involvement, and inclusion. In addition to impacting learning and academic success, linguistic racism also negatively affects students' socio-emotional well-being, causing shame, insecurity, low self-esteem, depression, social anxiety, and even suicidal ideation. So to mitigate these effects, students who experience linguistic racism often must engage in what Holliday and Squire call sociolinguistic labor, which they define as the physical, emotional, and psychological effort put into deploying sociolinguistic resources in a way that is meant to satisfy others. So this might look like code switching, switching to a different, more accepted way of languaging for a particular context, or other forms of self-monitoring. So as a result of the ongoing pressure to conform that they experience in the writing classroom, racialized multilingual students must constantly navigate these ongoing tensions as they negotiate their linguistic practices in ways that linguistically privileged students are rarely required to do. This can have detrimental effects on the writing experiences of racialized multilingual students, exerting influence over how they see themselves as writers, complicating their experiences with language and writing, and reducing their sense of ownership over their own linguistic practices. However, honoring students' own ways of languaging continues to be a site of struggle for many instructors teaching writing, whether in writing programs or across disciplines. So here I'm going to talk about a couple of the ways in which the deep entrenchment of racial-linguistic ideologies in the teaching of writing provides avenues for the enactment of linguistic racism through both common beliefs and embodied habits of mind. So first, even for instructors who work to enact an anti-racist writing pedagogy, the linguistic racism that will be experienced by students in other contexts often presents a paradox, one which has perhaps been most accurately described by Poe Inouye, who asked, how can we engage in fostering a more just society within our classrooms or programs when we know that most outside our programs and classrooms will assess our students' writing in vastly different ways, often to our students' detriment, often in contradiction to the lessons we offer them about language and its valuing. However, in attempting to ensure that students are prepared for the real world, quote unquote, in which they will encounter linguistic racism, instructors are often instead active participants in the social and ideological construction of that world. Instructors' desire to ensure that students are prepared for the linguistic racism they will encounter elsewhere has been conceptualized by Delpit as teaching students the codes of power, which holds that acquisition of standardized English provides students, particularly racialized multilingual students, with upward mobility and societal success. Even instructors who advocate for the acceptance of non-standardized forms of languaging in academic and professional spaces often believe that standardized English should still be taught because of its perceived power and cultural capital. However, these arguments are based on the belief that only the use of standardized English counts as linguistic success, and that other Englishes are less communicative and therefore less useful or valid in academic or professional contexts. Moreover, they presuppose that linguistically and racially minoritized individuals can easily circumvent linguistic racism by adopting standardized English, which ignores the ideological nature of standardized English and the reality that adherence to it will not prevent them from being perceived through the exclusionary lens of the white listening subject. In this way, writing instruction that is predicated on providing racialized multilingual students with the codes of power is, as Rosa and Flores put it, not empowering, but rather a mechanism for supporting the racial-linguistic status quo. Another similar way of enacting linguistic racism, one which is deceptively benign and thus more common, is the result of discourses of appropriateness through which standardized English is conceptualized as a neutral and objective linguistic practice, one which stands alone as the accepted and appropriate norm for academic settings, while non-standardized linguistic practices are perceived as inappropriate and unacademic. Again, the concept of appropriateness rests on the false assumption that racialized individuals need only modify their linguistic practices to match standardized English in order to be read as appropriate, and that by doing so, they can control how they are perceived and interpreted. However, linguistic stigmatization should be understood less as a reflection of objective linguistic practices than of perceptions that construe appropriateness based on speakers' racial positions. When initially proposing the racial-linguistic theoretical perspective, this is what Rosa and Flores intended to critique, these appropriateness-based approaches to language education, which they argue are, quote, implicated in the reproduction of racial normativity by expecting language minoritized students to model their linguistic practices after the white speaking subject, despite the fact that the white listening subject continues to perceive these students' language use in racialized ways. Appropriateness reifies racial inequality through supposedly neutral and normative standards, which in reality burden racially and linguistically minoritized students with the task of performing whiteness. In this way, discourses of appropriateness work covertly to delegitimize non-standardized Englishes, conveying to linguistically and racially minoritized students that the way they communicate in their own communities does not carry equal weight in academic, professional, and other formal writing contexts, and that they must assimilate to white Western ideas of appropriateness in order to be successful. One final way in which linguistic racism is often enacted in writing instruction, and one which I plan to focus on in my dissertation research, is through the racial-linguistic ideologies that are embodied in one's habitus as an instructor. In other words, the ways in which our beliefs, judgments, and dispositions are mediated through racial-linguistic ideologies and how we embody those in our pedagogies and practices. Woolard notes that language ideologies, quote, occur not only as mental constructs, but also in embodied practices and dispositions. They inhere in what Pierre, I always get this wrong, Bourdieu called the habitus, that is the implicit knowledge and ingrained sensibilities that are inscribed in the body through repeated social experience. Inouye has discussed this phenomenon as it relates to writing pedagogy and his concept of the white racial habitus, a term he uses to make visible the ways in which whiteness is entrenched in the embodied subjectivity of pedagogical practices and to foreground the dominant hegemonic discourses underlying writing instruction and assessment. Like the white listening subject, the white habitus is not an identity category, but rather a power construct, one which functions as a set of dispositions that are embodied and performed by individuals through actions, languages, practices, judgments, expectations, and discourses. The white racial habitus is a significant factor in how racial-linguistic ideologies come to be reproduced in writing instruction because, as Gilliard points out, teachers teach tradition. That is, they teach what they have learned and have come to believe to be appropriate and acceptable. Thus, when instructors promote standardized English as a traditionally appropriate norm to which students should aspire, they are enacting linguistic racism and tacitly reifying whiteness through standardized English's historic connection to privilege and power through whiteness. However, while racial-linguistic ideologies as enacted through the pedagogical habitus may constitute a less visible form of linguistic racism, it is all the more insidious for that reason. As Jenks notes, the pedagogical habitus is difficult to change because to do so requires changing who we are and where we have come from, because our embodied practices are bound up with ingrained beliefs about education and what we value in students. And as a result, racial-linguistic ideologies as manifested through one's habitus are particularly deep-rooted. So while the racial-linguistic theoretical perspective has been taken up in a lot of educational research and K-12 pedagogy related to resisting deficit discourses and linguistic racism, particularly in bilingual education programs and world language instruction, it has not yet been widely applied in writing studies where I believe it can be used to productively build upon the work of scholars like Smitherman, Young, Villanueva, Gilliard, Kynard, Perryman-Clark, Inouye, and Baker-Bell, and more, who have long been attending to the interconnection between language and race and how we teach writing and administrate writing programs. Because the powerful forces of racial-linguistic ideologies form such a central part of how writing is perceived, it is essential for any WAC program to attend to racial and linguistic difference at the core of its mission and purpose, and the racial-linguistic theoretical perspective offers a framework for enacting this work. So when writing instructors view racialized multilingual students writing through the lens of appropriateness or require them to adhere to standardized English under the guise of helping them succeed, we are not only complicit in enforcing standards that are linguistically racist, we are also failing to recognize and support students' full linguistic and communicative potential, and in some cases even doing harm. Put plainly, we cannot be effective writing instructors without understanding the racial-linguistic ideologies that shape our pedagogies and practices and divesting from racial-linguistic ideologies in our teaching. What you see there on the slide is a working definition of a racial-linguistic justice approach to writing instruction. This is something I'm developing for my dissertation research, and this is an approach that I believe also has implications for writing across the curriculum. So I'm defining a racial-linguistic justice approach to writing instruction as the ongoing recursive praxis of recognizing that students' linguistic experiences are not separate from their racial experiences, understanding the role of racial-linguistic ideologies in fostering deficit beliefs about student writing, critically examining how our own assumptions about language and race are impacting our pedagogies and practices, and taking action to resist racial-linguistic ideologies in our teaching in order to affirm and hold space for all students' linguistic practices. So I've come to conceptualize the work of writing across the curriculum as a key interventional site for a move toward racial-linguistic justice through my work as a writing center tutor here at UW-Madison and other institutions, as well as my work as TA Assistant Director of the Writing Fellows Program here for the last couple of years. These roles have given me the opportunity to observe how vestiges of colonial perspectives on language and race often linger in the way writing is taught and assessed, and how students understand writing as well. Sorry, I lost my place here. And it's helped me understand how enacting a shift in perspective among instructors teaching writing in courses across multiple disciplines, not just within writing programs, will be a critical task if we want to accomplish a more just and inclusive vision of higher education more broadly. The use of a ratio-linguistic approach to designing and implementing WAC programming and to scholarship in teaching and writing across the curriculum could help increase instructors' critical awareness of ratio-linguistic ideologies, which in turn could help them develop more inclusive assignments and assessment practices and create more equitable classroom experiences that allow all students to learn and engage through writing. All right, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you. All right. For question. Kelly, you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sweet. All right. I'm gonna remember that the microphone is here. So we have a few minutes for questions for either of us. I'll check the app and see if there's anything on there. I'll walk around. Yeah. Me or my eyes saw you first, so we'll go here.
This is just a comment, but I guess it could be turned into a question for Kelly. So I appreciate the overview of racial linguistics as coming from education, especially Nelson Flores. But I guess my question is, did you get the chance to look at transnational writing? And I mean, including Kanagaraja, Sarah Alvarez, Sam Sharma. There's a lot of us that actually are doing work in linguistic justice. So I don't know if you want to pair that with the literature you've already covered. I think you will see that there is a lot of work done in that. So I don't know if you got the chance to look at those scholars as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is, as I mentioned previously, this is taken from the first chapter of my dissertation. Most of this, I'm familiar with everybody you mentioned there, particularly Kanagaraja. It's just not something that I had incorporated necessarily into this chapter, so I apologize if it seemed like I was overlooking something there, but thank you for bringing that into the conversation.
And I saw another hand and I see Shauna on the chat. You'll go next.
So first of all, thank you to both of you. These were really interesting presentations. So Allison, I just wondered, now that you've taught your course once, congratulations, good job, you made it through the end. I guess, are there some larger sort of principles that you think are applicable to those of us who are interested in incorporating these kinds of questions or issues into our courses, just in general? Like, are there things beyond just, okay, this is what I did in the classroom, right? What would you recommend for the rest of us?
Thank you. Oh, that's a great question. And like I said, the class ended 4 days ago. So I'm fresh in terms of what I would like to do next. One big thing that I did see, and it goes back to my discussion with my students about access and accessibility. Our department has a big kind of technical communication thread that goes along with like writing in the professions and writing in the disciplines. So this element of like document design, right, is something that students really like grab onto quite easily, whether they're like in business fields or whatever it might be. Understanding like and talking about students as documents and text is something that gives them a really big avenue into not thinking about the writing courses as English courses, right? So one of the things I tell my students like right at the beginning of the class was like, we're not the English department, because they just instinctively call any writing class that they take an English class. And it's like, no, in English, there's like 4 different things you can do. We're the university writing program. And so like really taking the time to frame those discussions with them. My first unit lasts a little longer than 10 weeks allows, really, because I think it's really important to have those discussions with them overall. I'm also really, really influenced by Inouye's like assessment ecologies and anti-racist writing pedagogies in terms of, and that doesn't always look like contract rating, right? But it does look like thinking about how students do labor in the classroom and what gets rewarded, and big on allowing students like that revision component, multiple drafts. I had so many students that came up to me saying like they've never taken a course like this because it allowed that flexibility and that adaptability, which is what DEI and writing across the curriculum, like as umbrellas do, right? And so you bring up a really good point too, that's like one take on how to do this type of work, right? There are so many approaches, as you've highlighted as well, transnationalism, translingualism, decoloniality, like you're trying to pull from all of these spaces and make it intersectional, right? And so in having those big kinds of framing conversations with students, I think is helpful as well. They really, really like the advocacy campaign. They're like, I get to like research stuff I give a shit about, and I get a grade for it in a college class, right? And some of them, like I said, are inclined to do that type of activism. But like I had a statistics student who he was like, I didn't think that I could write about how to do like equitable math equations, but here I am writing about it, right? And so really just allowing students to like take the lead on the things that they want to research, what they want to develop and compose. Does that answer your question? I kind of went on a tangent. Okay. Shauna, I think you had your hand up in the Zoom.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope
Go
you
ahead.
can hear me okay. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you both. I missed part of Allison's presentation, but I enjoyed the second half and then enjoyed hearing Kelly's. And I want to throw in one thing, another framework to check out is critical language awareness. I know that won't surprise anybody who knows me, but one of the reasons I wanted to ask a question is because what's drawn me to CLA and what I'm a little bit concerned about with how the racial-linguistic ideologies piece gets taken up in literacy and writing instruction is that it does sort of seem to sometimes reinforce this binary that either you're resisting norms and conventions, it's all about resistance, and anything that's normative or conventional is white supremacist and harmful to students, or you're just complete assimilationist and you're making students completely lose their voice and lose their identities, and it's just reinforcing institutional or systemic racism. And so I guess my question is, what I haven't yet heard a good answer to from folks who are really more radical, maybe even than me in this, and kind of the whole like, yes, let's try to bust open these norms and conventions and standards, is what do you say to students when they're required to take a writing class? You know, what's your justification to that if you say what you already do with language, what you already have as a language user is completely sufficient and fine, then why are they required to take our writing courses? And I just wondered, Kelly, I'm not trying to ask this as a gotcha, but genuinely, what framing would you use with students to say, this is why you're required to take this course? Or do we want to abandon the idea of required writing courses altogether? Because maybe we say, what you have works for you, and we want to make the academy accommodate to you so that you don't need a writing course.
Yeah, so I'm, hi, Shauna. I've been to several of your like meetings and talks and things like that. I love your book. So as I said, basically what I'm kind of reading from is from my dissertation, and essentially what the focus of that is going to be is on helping instructors through a participatory narrative inquiry project to think about how these racial-linguistic ideologies inhere in our habitus. So that's kind of the gist of what that work is. Actually, what I would use is critical language awareness. So essentially helping students understand that that these ideologies exist, kind of using that framework of thinking about self-reflection, social justice, rhetorical agency, I believe were the goals of the CLA pedagogy. I actually recently at IWCA last fall gave a talk about how I use this in my tutor education course. But I think just sort of combining those goals of reflecting on how you are yourself like influenced by these ideologies, considering how to talk to students about this. That's kind of what we did in our tutor education course. But I think ultimately the goal for any writing classroom would be to move toward a more CLA-like pedagogy where we are helping students to understand all of these ideologies at work and helping them understand this is why you're encountering this in your other writing courses. And you can make a choice to resist, you can make a choice to conform, you can do what you want. And that's, I think, where I would want to go as an instructor. I haven't taught like a first year writing type of course in a couple of years, but the next time I do, I am planning. Your book has come out since then, and I've read a lot more work relating to CLA, and so that's I'm actually intending to design my next course kind of along those same goals. So that's in terms of like broader sort of programmatic things. I'm not sure if I have a good answer for that at the moment, but really that's where I think any writing class would need to go, is helping students make more better informed choices. So yeah,
That's helpful to know, because sometimes I think people dismiss the idea that conformity is even a possibility, and it's like,
right.
I don't know if we can quite go there.
Well, yeah, and you know, when I tutor students, this is a conversation that I'm not able to have a lengthy conversation with them about all of these things, but I do talk to them about the choices, and this is what your audience is going to expect. And that's always been a real struggle for me as a writing tutor, given the limited amount of time that I have to work with students on one draft. And so anybody who wants to do that work in writing center studies, I would be very interested to hear what you have to say, but because it's a struggle to kind of do that as a writing instructor to begin with, but as somebody just working with the student individually, I think it's even more difficult. So yeah.
Thanks so much.
I feel like that was a super long answer. So
It's okay, we're
thanks.
2 for 2. All right, other questions? We have a few minutes left. And we're very excited to start the weekend, or the sessions tomorrow, I know too. Other questions? Any comments? Courtney, I see you. Go ahead.
Hello, hello. So question for Allison. For your multimodal advocacy campaigns for your students, have any of them expressed, I know it's the first time and maybe this will happen more as it grows, but have any of them expressed wanting to sort of, as we might say, take the show on the road and actually move towards working with outside partnerships, either within the university or community partnerships, to grow those moving forward?
Yeah, I would say, so our courses are capped at 25. And so I would say half of them are doing work that they're actually gonna like submit and put out into the universe. Whether that's like they're actually submitting the research proposal, the grant proposal, or the project proposal that they worked on in class. And if part of their campaign is in-person work, they plan to do those types of things. But we also have in our writing sequences and our courses that we offer, writing internship classes that work with groups of students that are trying to get paired into internships. I'll get there. And sorry, I'm gonna stutter. That pair students with like-minded businesses or community partners, local communities in Davis, for instance. And they're actually going to go out and do their work in the real world. Like always, like that argument that the work that we do in the classroom is reflective of the real world too. So what they're taking out and putting into practice is available to them as well. Some students are like very new to the idea that writing isn't book reports and like thinking about like literature and courses like that. And so it opens like a big amount of freedom for them too. I always try to tell students like, the cool thing about writing and composing and thinking of it in these frameworks is that like maybe it's not very freeing or to you to know that you're going to work on this stuff for the rest of your lives, and so like you're never going to be a master or an expert at it, but you can take the work that you're doing and you can apply it in multiple spaces and revise it and repurpose it and so on. Like a lot of my students, my STEM students, have like really cool lab work and data that they're wondering what to do with. And they put it into these proposals and they turn them into these advocacy campaigns that can turn into community activism projects. So I would say it's about 50-50 right now. And I can report back later on what those actually look like if they tell me down the line how those went. But yeah, thank you for that question. Anything else? I think maybe I have time for like one more if you want to throw your hat in the ringer. having to watch like free spaces where these could happen. So. All right, y'all. Well, I can call it then. Thank you so much. Happy Friday. Take care of yourselves.